My elderly neighbor ran down the street screaming like a maniac every single morning before dawn. I was terrified of her, until the night she slipped a note under my front door saying she wasn't crazy. She was just pretending so my husband wouldn't suspect a thing. "Check the security cameras in the backyard," the paper read. When I pulled up the footage, I saw my husband digging something in the dark, and next to him were tools that no innocent man would ever need to have. But before we continue, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. My name is Emily. I am 32 years old, and for a long time, I believed I had built the perfect life. I married Mark 4 years ago after an intense and passionate courtship that seemed like something out of a romantic movie. He was attentive, affectionate, worked as a sales manager at a tech company, and always made me feel like the most important woman in the world. We lived in a comfortable house in a gated community in the suburbs, surrounded by silence and tranquility. But that peace began to crack about 6 months ago, when something strange started happening every night. Our neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor, a woman in her 70s who lived alone in the house next door, began having nocturnal outbursts. Always around 2 in the morning, I would wake up to the sound of hurried footsteps on the sidewalk and sharp screams that cut through the early morning like knives. She would run back and forth in front of our driveway, yelling nonsense, sometimes laughing hysterically, other times crying as if she were seeing something terrible. At first, I was terrified. My heart raced every time I heard those screams. I would wake up in a cold sweat, clutching Mark's arm, begging him to do something. But he always calmed me down with that serene, steady voice I loved so much. "Babe, Mrs. Eleanor is sick. She has dementia. We can't blame her for that," he would say, stroking my hair while I trembled under the duvet. "If we call the police or the paramedics, they'll put her in a horrible home. Do you want that on your conscience?" And of course, I didn't. Mark had this gift for making me feel guilty for being afraid, as if I lacked compassion. So I swallowed my fear and tried to go back to sleep, even with the screams echoing through the empty street. Weeks went by, and the episodes became part of the routine. Every morning, the same ritual. Mrs. Eleanor would appear running, screaming, hitting lampposts, laughing to herself. The other neighbors complained too, but no one did anything concrete. Some said she had family in another state, but they had abandoned her there. Others said she had always been strange, even before getting old. Mark remained my safe harbor. He never showed irritation with the situation, just an almost saintly patience. Sometimes I would see him by the window, watching Mrs. Eleanor from afar, with a thoughtful expression I couldn't quite decipher. When I asked him what he was thinking, he would smile and say he was just worried about her safety. "She could get hurt running around in the dark like that," he would comment. "But there isn't much we can do, honey, except have patience." And I had patience, or at least I tried to. But the fear didn't go away. Every night I went to sleep with a heavy heart, knowing that in a few hours I would be woken up by those screams. I started having insomnia. I drank chamomile tea, took melatonin, anything to help me relax. But nothing worked completely. One thing that started to bother me, besides the screaming, were small details I had been noticing about Mark. Things I didn't pay attention to before, but now seemed to pile up like pebbles in a shoe. For example, he was leaving work later. He would come home sometimes after 11 at night, tired, his clothes slightly dirty with soil or dust. When I asked, he said he was supervising IT infrastructure projects at client sites, that he needed to visit warehouses and construction zones. It made sense. I had no reason to doubt him. But there was also the fact that he started locking his phone with a passcode. Before, it was just facial recognition, and I had free access if I needed to use it for anything. Now, a 6-digit code, which he said was a company requirement for security reasons. Again, it made sense. And then there was the backyard. Our yard was large, with some fruit trees and a lawn that Mark loved to take care of. But recently he started moving earth in a specific area, near the old oak tree in the back. He said he was planning to build a wooden deck, an outdoor gourmet space to host friends. He started digging, moving dirt, bringing in materials. He did it all alone, usually at night or on weekends, saying it was a surprise for me and that he wanted to do it with his own hands. I found it strange that he did it alone, without hiring a contractor. But Mark was always very handy, very skilled, and I was too busy with my own work as a graphic designer, working from home most of the time, to question it much. Until that night arrived. Mark had a business trip to Denver, 3 days of conferences and meetings. He left on a Thursday morning. He gave me a long kiss on the forehead and told me to be careful, to lock the doors tight, not to open up to strangers. As always, protective and worried. I was alone in the house that Thursday night. I ate a light dinner, watched a series on Netflix, tried to relax. But the loneliness of the big house made me restless. I kept hearing noises, the wind hitting the windows, the creaking of the wood in the ceiling, little clicks that sounded like footsteps. And then, right on time, at 2 a.m, Mrs. Eleanor's screams began. This time it seemed different, closer, more insistent. I was lying in bed, stiff with fear, when I heard a distinct sound, a shuffling noise, as if something was being pushed under the front door. I got up slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. I put on my slippers and walked to the living room, turning on lights along the way. When I got near the door, I saw a piece of white folded paper on the floor. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was common notebook paper, folded several times. I opened it slowly and read the words written in blue pen, in shaky but legible handwriting. Emily, I am not crazy. I am not senile. I am pretending. Your husband cannot know that I am lucid. Please, look at the security cameras in your backyard, the footage from the last few days. You need to see what he is doing when he thinks no one is watching. Then come to my house. I will be waiting. Please, trust me. Your life may be in danger. My mouth went dry. I read the note 3 times, trying to process it. Mrs. Eleanor wasn't crazy? She was faking it? Why? And what could Mark be doing in the yard that I needed to see? My first instinct was to dismiss it as the delusion of a genuinely sick person. But something about the writing, the way the words were organized, seemed too lucid to be the work of someone with advanced dementia. And there was the last sentence. Your life may be in danger. This chilled my spine. I went to the office where the computer connected to the home security system was. Mark had installed cameras about a year ago, saying it was for our protection since the community was secluded and had some unoccupied houses. We had cameras at the entrance, in the garage, in the laundry area, and in the backyard. I turned on the computer with trembling hands. I accessed the monitoring software. The cameras recorded continuously, and files were saved for 30 days before being overwritten. I started looking for the backyard recordings. I picked a random date from the previous week when Mark said he had stayed up late working on that deck. I fast-forwarded the video to the night. It was around 11 o'clock. The image was in black and white, with that greenish quality of night vision. And then I saw it. Mark was in the yard, but he wasn't building any deck. He was digging deep, with a shovel, sweating, moving earth with an almost frantic intensity. And next to him, illuminated by the dim light of the neighbor's post, I saw a large black plastic tarp, folded and ready, the kind of tarp used to cover things. My stomach turned. I continued watching. Mark dug for almost 2 hours. The hole got deep, maybe 5 feet. He stopped, wiped the sweat away, looked around as if checking if anyone was watching. Then he took the tarp and spread it carefully next to the hole. And then he picked up something that made my blood freeze. A thick rope and industrial duct tape. He placed those items inside the hole. He covered it with a little dirt and then left the frame. I paused the video. My hands were sweating so much the mouse almost slipped. I tried to breathe, but it felt like there wasn't enough air in the room. What was that? Why was my husband digging a huge hole in the yard, hiding a tarp, rope, and duct tape? And why do it in the middle of the night, in secret? I searched other dates. He had done this on at least 3 different nights in the last 2 weeks. Always the same pattern. Arrive late, go straight to the yard, dig, organize materials, cover everything back up. And in one of the recordings, I saw something that made me stand up and pace around the room, wanting to vomit. Mark was crouching near the hole and had an object in his hand. I zoomed in as much as I could. It was a knife. A large knife, with a black handle, which he wiped carefully with a cloth before putting it in a bag. It wasn't a kitchen knife. It was a hunting knife, the kind that cuts meat with precision. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, trying not to panic. My husband, the man I loved, who shared a bed with me every night, who kissed me every morning before leaving for work, was digging a grave in our backyard. A grave the size of a human body, and preparing tools that seemed destined to. What? Tie someone up? Hide someone? And the only question hammering in my head, insistent and terrifying, was, who is that grave for? I stayed paralyzed on the office floor long enough for my legs to start tingling. The light from the computer illuminated my face in blue tones, while my brain desperately tried to find a rational explanation for what I had just seen. Maybe Mark was doing some complex gardening work. Maybe he needed to bury debris, construction scraps, something that required a deep hole. But then, why the tarp? Why the rope? Why the knife? And why hide all of this from me? I looked again at Mrs. Eleanor's note, still crumpled in my hand. Your life may be in danger. The words seemed to pulse on the paper, gaining a weight I could no longer ignore. Could that hole be for me? The idea was too absurd to process. Mark loved me, didn't he? He was always attentive, careful, present. He never raised his voice at me. He never showed any sign of violence or aggression. We were happy. I was sure we were happy. But then, why that feeling in my chest? That chill down my spine? That small, insistent voice in my head saying that something was very, very wrong. I got up from the floor with difficulty and went back to the living room. I looked out the window toward Mrs. Eleanor's house. It was all dark and silent now. She had stopped screaming a few minutes ago. The note said to go there, that she would be waiting. Part of me wanted to lock all the doors, crawl under the covers, and pretend none of this was happening. Wait for Mark to come back from the trip, act normal, maybe even ask about the deck casually and gauge his reaction. But another part of me, the part that had just watched my husband prepare what looked a lot like a clandestine grave, knew I couldn't simply ignore it. If Mrs. Eleanor had information, if she knew something I didn't, I needed to hear her. I put on some sneakers, threw a hoodie over my pajamas, and grabbed my cell phone. I checked 3 times that it had a full battery. I thought about calling someone, my sister, my mom, a friend. But what would I say? Hey, I think my husband is digging a grave in the backyard. I'm going to the crazy neighbor's house to investigate. They would think I was losing my mind. I opened the front door carefully, looking both ways before stepping out. The community was completely silent. There were no bright streetlights, just spaced-out posts that created more shadows than light. Mrs. Eleanor's house was only 60 feet from mine, but the walk there felt like miles. I walked fast along the sidewalk, arms crossed over my chest. When I reached her gate, I hesitated. What if this was a trap? What if Mrs. Eleanor was actually crazy and was luring me into her house for some deranged purpose? But then, her front door opened, illuminating the path to the entrance. And there she was. Mrs. Eleanor didn't look at all like the disheveled, hysterical woman I saw running through the streets every night. She was wearing simple but clean clothes, sweatpants, and a long-sleeved shirt. Her white hair was pulled back in a low, neat bun. And her eyes, the eyes I always imagined empty and confused, were perfectly lucid, fixed on me with an intensity that made me stop halfway. "Emily," she said, and her voice was steady, with no trace of the performative madness I was used to hearing. "Come in, please. We need to talk." I swallowed hard and moved forward. I went through the gate, crossed the small front garden, and entered the house. The interior was surprisingly normal, old furniture, but well kept, smelling of lavender, everything tidy and clean. Nothing to suggest a person with senile dementia lived there. Mrs. Eleanor closed the door behind me and threw the deadbolt. The sound of the lock made me jump. "Sorry," she said, noticing my startle. "It's a precaution. Sit down, please." She pointed to a floral fabric sofa, and I sat on the edge, tense, hands clasped in my lap. Mrs. Eleanor sat in an armchair across from me and looked at me with a seriousness that made me feel like I was being evaluated. "Did you see the footage?" she asked directly, without beating around the bush. I nodded, my voice stuck in my throat. "And?" she insisted. "Did you understand what is happening?" I don't know," I admitted, my voice coming out weak, almost a whisper. Mark is digging a hole in the yard. There's a tarp, tools, but I don't understand. Why? What for? Mrs. Eleanor sighed deeply, as if gathering strength to tell something very heavy. Emily, I'm going to be direct with you because we don't have much time. Mark isn't who you think he is, and that hole in your yard isn't for a deck or a renovation. My heart raced. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that your husband is planning to kill you. The words fell on me like a bucket of ice water. I shook my head, refusing. No, that makes no sense. Mark loves me. He would never. He pretends to love you. Mrs. Eleanor interrupted me, her voice hard but not cruel, just like he pretended to love the others. I blinked, confused. The others? She got up and went to a small desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and took out a file folder. She came back and placed it in front of me, opening it to reveal a stack of papers, printed photos, and notes. 6 years ago, a woman named Sarah died under suspicious circumstances. She was married to a man working in the tech sector. They lived in a secluded house, just like you two. She was found dead in the backyard, and the police closed the case as a domestic accident, a fall followed by head trauma. The husband, devastated, sold the house and disappeared. She pushed a photo toward me. It was of a young, pretty woman with brown hair and a wide smile, and next to her, in the wedding photo, was a man. A man I didn't recognize immediately, but who had familiar features, the jawline, the shape of the eyes. 2 years later, Mrs. Eleanor continued, turning another page. Another woman, Jessica, married to a sales manager, same story, secluded house, sudden death, filed as an accident. Another photo, another woman, another man beside her. And this time, even with different hair and the glasses he was wearing in the picture, I recognized him. It was Mark. My head spun. No, it can't be. That can't be him. He changes his name, his appearance, his city, but the pattern is always the same, Emily. He marries women who have some assets, some inheritance, something of value. He makes them fall in love, builds a seemingly perfect life, and then, when the time is right, he eliminates them and keeps everything. I felt like the floor was opening up beneath me. How do you know all this? Who are you? Mrs. Eleanor leaned forward, eyes fixed on mine. I was a private investigator for 30 years, Emily. I retired 10 years ago, but I still keep contacts. When you and Mark moved here, I recognized him. It took time. A lot of research, cross-referencing data, but I was sure it was him. The problem is, I don't have enough concrete evidence for the police to act, so I started watching him, and pretending to be crazy, so he wouldn't suspect me. I looked at her, stunned. You pretended to be crazy to protect me? To protect you and gather evidence, she confirmed. But time is running out. Mark is accelerating the plan. He dug that hole in the last few days because he is preparing, and when he comes back from this trip, Emily, he is going to execute it. I brought my hands to my face, trying to hold back the tears that were starting to fall. But why? Why me? I don't have a fortune. I don't have anything special. You inherited this house from your parents, didn't you? Mrs. Eleanor interrupted. A house on a large, valuable lot in an area that is being highly sought after by developers. Mark knows that. He married you for that. It was true. My parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago, shortly before I met Mark. The house had been my inheritance. Mark always said he loved the place, that he wanted to build our future there. But now, looking back, I realized he had been the one to suggest we move here, the one who insisted it would be perfect, the one who planned everything down to the smallest detail. What was he waiting for? I asked, voice choked. Why now? He probably waited long enough not to raise suspicion. 4 years of marriage is a reasonable time. And now, with the land gaining value, he must have decided it's time. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. What do I do? Do I go to the police? Show the footage? Mrs. Eleanor shook her head. The footage shows suspicious behavior, but it's not proof of a crime. He can claim he was doing anything else, and without a body, without concrete evidence of intent to commit murder, the police can't arrest him. Then what do I do? I asked, desperate. Wait for him to kill me? No. said Mrs. Eleanor firmly. We catch him in the act. We make him reveal himself. I looked at her, not understanding. You are going to go back home. You are going to act normally when he comes back from the trip. And we are going to set up a situation where he is forced to show his true intentions, with witnesses, with irrefutable proof. My whole body was shaking. That's insane. I can't pretend everything is fine knowing he wants to kill me. You can, Emily, and you will. Because the alternative is to run now and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for him to find you. Men like Mark don't give up easily. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. My entire life had changed in a single night. The man I loved, whom I trusted, was a serial killer, and now I needed to be strong enough to face him. What do I need to do? I asked finally, opening my eyes and looking at Mrs. Eleanor. She smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who recognizes courage when they see it. First, you're going back home. Tomorrow you act as if nothing happened. Reply to his messages normally. And when he returns, we put our plan into action. I went back home with trembling legs and my head spinning. Every shadow on the street seemed to be watching me. Every noise made me jump. I locked the door as soon as I got inside. I checked all the windows twice and went straight to the bedroom. But I couldn't sleep a wink that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything Mrs. Eleanor had told me. Mark, my husband, was a serial killer who killed for money. He had done it before, with other women. And now, I was next on the list. I picked up my phone several times, thinking about calling my sister, someone in the family. But what would I say? I found out my husband wants to kill me, but I have no proof, so I need to pretend everything is fine to catch him red-handed? They would have me committed. In the early morning, I received a text from Mark. Babe, the meeting ran late. More tomorrow. Love you. Sleep well. I looked at those words on the screen. So common, so normal, so affectionate, and I felt nauseous. How could he write that knowing what he was planning to do to me? How can someone be so cold, so calculating? I replied with a simple, love you too, good night, as I normally would. And then I stared at the conversation, wondering how many other women had received similar messages from him before dying. When the sun finally rose, I was exhausted but unable to relax. I took a long shower, letting the hot water fall over me while I cried in silence. I tried to pull myself together. I needed to act normal. I couldn't give any sign that I knew anything. During the day, I worked on the computer, or at least pretended to work. In reality, I spent hours searching the internet, looking for information about the women Mrs. Eleanor had mentioned. I found old news reports, obituaries, some articles about the deaths, and in all of them, the same narrative. Tragic domestic accidents, devastated husbands, no suspicion. Mark had been perfect at covering his tracks. If it weren't for Mrs. Eleanor, he would have been perfect with me too. In the afternoon, she appeared at my door, dressed in her usual clothes, a bit sloppy, hair intentionally messed up, but her eyes were alert, intelligent. Can we talk? She asked, loud enough so it seemed like she was just being a friendly neighbor. I let her in. We sat in the living room, and she handed me a small object, a pearl brooch. It's a camera and microphone, she explained in a low voice. Wear this when Mark comes back. It will record everything. I took the brooch, feeling its weight in the palm of my hand. It seemed so small, so fragile, to carry the responsibility of possibly saving my life. And then? I asked. What is the exact plan? Mrs. Eleanor leaned forward. When he returns, you're going to tell him you need to talk to him about something important. You'll take him to the backyard, near the hole he dug. You're going to confront him, but in a way that makes him feel in control. Men like him love to gloat, to brag when they think they've won. What if he attacks me before that? I'll be watching. I have cameras pointed at your yard from my house. At the slightest sign of real danger, I call the police. But we need him to incriminate himself, Emily. We need him to admit what he's planning, preferably with details. I bit my lip, nervous. What if he doesn't fall for the trap? What if he realizes? He won't realize. Men like Mark are arrogant. He thinks you're too fragile, too naive to suspect him. Use that to your advantage. We spent the rest of the afternoon rehearsing, Mrs. Eleanor made me repeat several times what I should say, how I should act, how to provoke Mark subtly without appearing too obvious. It was like memorizing a script for a play, except the stage was my own house, and the price of a mistake was my life. Mark returned on Saturday night, just as planned. I heard his car pulling into the garage, and my whole body tensed up. I took a deep breath, adjusted the camera brooch on my blouse, and forced a smile onto my face. When he walked through the door, he had his travel bag, and that charming smile that once made me fall in love. He came toward me, hugged me tight, and kissed me for a long time. "I missed you," he murmured against my hair. "You too," I lied, my stomach churning. He dropped the bag and went to the kitchen to get water. I followed him, trying to seem casual. "How was the trip?" I asked, leaning against the counter. "Productive. We closed some good contracts. I'll need to travel again next month, but this time it will be quicker." "Ah," was all I could say. He looked at me, head slightly tilted. "Are you okay? You look tired." "Just didn't sleep very well alone here. The house gets very quiet." "Did Mrs. Eleanor act up?" he asked, and I noticed a strange glint in his eyes at the mention of her name. "She did. Ran around screaming yesterday again. But I'm used to it." Mark gave a small smile. "Poor thing. She's going to end up hurting herself one of these days." The way he said it gave me chills. It sounded more like a prediction than genuine concern. I cleared my throat. "Mark, I wanted to talk to you about something. It's important." He straightened up, attentive. "Sure. What happened?" "It's about the backyard. About what you're building out there." I saw a subtle shift in his expression, an almost imperceptible tension around his eyes. "The deck? What about it?" "It's just, I was looking out the window the other day, and I saw you dug a really big hole there, and it made me curious. Can you show me how it's going to look? I want to understand the project." Mark stayed silent for a moment too long. Then he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, babe. Do you want to go now?" "We can," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He put his arm around my shoulders and guided me to the back door. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. We passed through the mudroom and went out into the yard. The night was clear, with a full moon illuminating everything with a cold, silvery light. We walked across the lawn until we reached the old oak tree, and there it was. The hole. He had covered it with wooden planks, probably to disguise it, but you could see the edges, the disturbed earth around it. "So?" said Mark, letting go of my shoulder and walking to the edge of the hole. "This is going to be the foundation for the deck. It needs to be deep to be stable." "It seems very deep for a simple deck," I commented, approaching cautiously. "It's just that I want to do something elaborate, with different levels, you know. It's going to be beautiful." He spoke with such naturalness, such conviction, that for a second I almost believed him, almost forgot I was looking at what would likely be my grave. "Mark," I began, and my voice trembled slightly. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." He turned to me with a curious expression. "Sure, ask away. Why did you marry me?" The question took him by surprise. He blinked, confused. "What do you mean, why?" "Because I love you, Emily. You know that. But why me specifically? What attracted you to me?" "Babe, why are you asking this?" he said, taking a step toward me. "Are you feeling insecure? Just answer, please." Mark sighed, as if being patient with a child. "You were special, smart, pretty, independent. When I met you, I knew I wanted to spend my life with you." "And the house?" I asked, my voice becoming firmer. "The house I inherited from my parents. Did that have any influence on your decision?" I saw the change in his face. Subtle, but it was there, the mask starting to crack. "What kind of question is that?" he said, and there was a new hardness in his tone. "It's a simple question, Mark. Did you marry me for the house?" He let out a short laugh, devoid of humor. "You're being ridiculous." "Ridiculous?" I repeated, feeling the anger starting to boil inside me. "I know about the others, Mark, Sarah, Jessica. I know what you did to them." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crickets stopped chirping. Mark stood completely still, staring at me with an intensity that made me want to run, but I forced myself to stand still, to stare back. And then, slowly, he smiled. But it wasn't the charming, warm smile I knew. It was something cold, empty, terrifying. "So you know?" he said calmly, as if we were discussing the weather. "The crazy old lady told you, didn't she?" I knew she was faking. I should have gotten rid of her first. My blood froze. He had just confessed. He had just admitted everything. "Why, Mark?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why do this?" He shrugged, hands in his pockets, completely relaxed. "Money, of course. Why else? I grew up with nothing, Emily. I had to work like a dog my whole life just to survive. And then I realized there was an easier way. Lonely women, with assets, desperate for company. It was almost too easy." "You're a monster," I whispered. "I'm practical," he corrected. "And you would have been the easiest of all, if that old hag hadn't interfered." He took his hands out of his pockets, and I saw he was holding something. "A rope, but that's okay," he continued, advancing slowly toward me. "This just complicates things a little, but the result will be the same." I stepped back, but he was faster. He grabbed my arm tightly, pulling me toward the hole. "No!" I screamed, trying to break free. And then, suddenly, bright floodlights turned on around the yard, voices shouting, people running. Mark stopped, confused, looking everywhere, and before he could process what was happening, police officers emerged from behind the fence, from the sides of the house, surrounding us completely. "Police! Let her go and put your hands where we can see them." Mark let go of me, stunned. I ran away from him, toward the officers, and there, near the fence, I saw Mrs. Eleanor, holding a tablet, showing the live feed of what had just happened. She had planned everything. The cameras, the hidden police, waiting for the exact moment. Mark was handcuffed, still not seeming to believe he had been caught. He looked at me one last time before being led away, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't remorse or regret. It was just anger at having failed. The days that followed were a blur of statements, lawyers, and interviews with the police. The house was taped off as a crime scene for nearly a whole week. Yellow police tape, forensics checking every corner of the yard, excavating the hole Mark had dug, looking for more evidence. They found more than they expected. Besides the tarp, the rope, and the duct tape, they found a toolbox buried near the oak tree. Inside it, surgical gloves, more rope, a hacksaw, heavy-duty cleaning products, and written instructions detailing how to dispose of a body without leaving a trace. Mark had planned every step with a coldness that left me nauseous for days. I was forced to stay in a hotel during the investigation. Mrs. Eleanor offered to stay with me, and I accepted without hesitation. I couldn't be alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's face that night, admitting everything with that terrifying calm. The recordings from the camera brooch and the cameras Mrs. Eleanor had strategically installed around the house were fundamental. They captured every word of his confession, every movement. There was no way to deny it, to claim a misunderstanding, or mount a defense. Mark was finished. The investigation deepened. The police began looking into the past cases Mrs. Eleanor had mentioned, Sarah and Jessica. The cases were reopened, exhumations requested, new forensic analyses done, and, one by one, the pieces fit. Mark wasn't just a murderer. He was a meticulous predator who had operated for nearly a decade, changing identities, appearance, cities, always one step ahead of the authorities. He had used at least 5 different names. He had bank accounts in 3 states. And, most disturbing of all, he had a notebook where he wrote details about his victims. When the police showed me the notebook, I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. There I was, Emily, 32 years old, graphic designer, heir to property valued at $1 million. Weaknesses: low self-esteem, emotional dependency, distant family, strategy, intense romance, quick marriage, gradual isolation from friends, elimination scheduled for after 4 years of marriage. Method: accidental fall, followed by head trauma. He had planned my death from the beginning, from the first meeting, the first conversation, the first kiss. Everything had been calculated, rehearsed, executed with surgical precision. I found my entry next to the notes on Sarah and Jessica. The methods were always similar but adapted to each situation. Sarah had fallen down a staircase. Jessica had drowned in the bathtub. I would be the victim of an accident in the yard, likely pushed into the hole and left there to die, or killed beforehand and buried. I cried for hours after seeing that, not for Mark, but for myself, for how long I had lived beside a monster without noticing, for how I had been manipulated, used, transformed into nothing more than a financial transaction. My family finally found out about everything. My sister, Claire, flew in immediately to stay with me. My mother went into shock and needed medical attention for a few days. Everyone had adored Mark. He had been the perfect son-in-law, the attentive brother-in-law, the exemplary husband. The idea that it had all been a farce, an elaborate performance, was too difficult to process. "How did you not realize?" my sister asked me one night while we were sitting in the hotel room. It wasn't an accusation, but a genuine question loaded with confusion and pain. "Because he was good at it," I replied, staring at the wall. He knew exactly what to say, how to act, when to back off, and when to advance. He studied this, Claire. He studied how to manipulate people, how to read weaknesses and use them. And I was vulnerable when I met him. We had just lost Mom and Dad. I was alone, lost. He took advantage of that. Claire took my hand and squeezed it. "This isn't your fault, Emily. None of this is your fault." Rationally, I knew she was right. But emotionally, I carried a huge weight of shame. Shame for having been fooled. Shame for not seeing the signs. Shame for having blindly trusted someone who was planning to kill me. The trial was quick. With all the evidence, Mark didn't have much room to maneuver. His lawyer tried to claim temporary insanity, but the meticulous notes in the notebook, the detailed planning, the cold execution of previous murders, all of that proved he was perfectly aware of his actions. I was called to testify. I had to sit in that courtroom, a few feet from Mark, and tell my story. Look at him while I recounted how I had been manipulated, deceived, almost killed. He watched me throughout the entire testimony, not with anger or remorse, just with that same empty expression, as if I were a math problem he hadn't managed to solve correctly. When it was his turn to speak, Mark refused to show any repentance. He said he had done what was necessary to survive in an unfair world, that women like me, who inherited wealth without working for it, didn't deserve it, that he was just redistributing resources more efficiently. The coldness with which he spoke was disturbing. Even the judge seemed affected. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, without the possibility of parole, one for each confirmed victim: Sarah, Jessica, and the attempt on me. The prosecution was still investigating other cases of women who had disappeared under suspicious circumstances in cities where Mark had lived. When the sentence was read, I felt immense relief, but also a strange emptiness. Justice had been done, but the scars remained. I went back home weeks after the trial. The police had released the property, but I couldn't look at it the same way. Every room carried poisoned memories. The living room where we watched movies, the kitchen where he made breakfast for me on Sundays, the bedroom where we slept together, where he held me every night while planning my death. Mrs. Eleanor appeared the first day I returned. She brought a homemade cake and a kind smile. "How are you?" she asked, sitting with me on the porch. "Surviving," I answered honestly. "I think that's the best description. Just surviving." She nodded, understanding. "It will take time. Trauma doesn't heal overnight. But you are strong, Emily. Stronger than you imagine." "I don't feel strong. I feel stupid, broken." "You are neither," she said firmly. "You were the victim of a sophisticated predator. That doesn't make you weak or foolish. It makes you human." We sat in silence for a moment, looking at the yard. The hole had been filled, the grass replanted. Soon, there would be no physical sign of what had happened there, but the emotional marks would remain for a long time. "Why did you do this?" I asked suddenly. "Why risk so much to save me? You didn't even know me well." Mrs. Eleanor sighed, looking at the horizon. "Because I've seen too many victims throughout my career. Women who were deceived, used, discarded, and most of the time I arrived too late. I could only collect evidence, close cases, bring post-mortem justice. But with you, I had the chance to be on time, to stop another life from being wasted. I couldn't let that opportunity pass. I felt tears burning in my eyes. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me. She squeezed my hand. You don't have to thank me. Just promise you'll keep living. Really living. Not just existing. Don't let him steal more from you than he already has. It was a difficult request. Because Mark had stolen a lot. He had stolen my trust, my innocence, my ability to believe in people easily. He had turned every relationship I had into something suspicious, tainted. But I promised to try. I promised her and myself that I wouldn't let this trauma define me forever. The first few months were the hardest. I started intensive therapy twice a week. My therapist, Dr. Roberts, was a specialist in trauma and PTSD. She helped me understand that what I was feeling, the constant fear, the recurring nightmares, the generalized distrust, were normal responses to an abnormal situation. You went through a deep betrayal, she explained in one session. It wasn't just the discovery that your husband wanted to kill you. It was the realization that the person you trusted most, who shared your life, your bed, your dreams, was never who you thought he was. That shakes the foundations of what you believe about relationships, about your own judgment. She was right. I questioned every decision I had made, every moment I had spent with Mark, trying to identify the signs I had missed. How had he managed to fool me so completely? What kind of person was I to not have realized I was living with a killer? You are not responsible for his sociopathy, Dr. Roberts insisted always. People like Mark are masters of manipulation. They spend years perfecting their masks. It is not a failure of yours not to have seen through it. Intellectually, I understood. But emotionally, I carried the guilt like a stone in my chest. I sold the house. I couldn't live there anymore. Every room suffocated me. Every shadow scared me. I bought a small apartment downtown, in a building with a 24-hour doorman and cameras on every floor. I needed to feel safe, even if it was an illusion. Mrs. Eleanor moved too. She said she wanted to be closer to downtown, closer to me. She rented an apartment in the same building, 3 floors up. She became more than a neighbor. She became family, the only person who truly understood what I had been through. She introduced me to a support group for victims of domestic violence and abuse. At first, I resisted. I wasn't physically abused, I argued. Mark never raised a hand to me, but he abused you psychologically, Mrs. Eleanor countered. Manipulation is abuse, Emily. Control is abuse, and planning homicide definitely qualifies. I went to the first meeting reluctantly, feeling like I was invading a space that wasn't mine. But as soon as the other women started sharing their stories, I realized I had more in common with them than I imagined. Stories of subtle manipulation, of gradual isolation from friends and family, of gaslighting, when the abuser makes you doubt your own perception of reality, of financial control disguised as care, of veiled threats covered by declarations of love. One woman, Julia, described how her ex-husband slowly convinced her she was incapable of making decisions alone. It started with small things. Let me choose the restaurant, you always hesitate too much. And it escalated to the point where she couldn't even buy clothes without his approval. Another, Mariana, told how her partner isolated her from her entire family, creating fabricated conflicts, making her believe everyone was against her, that only he truly cared. I recognized elements of those stories in my own experience. Mark had never been aggressive or controlling in an obvious way. But looking back, I saw the patterns, how he subtly discouraged me from keeping frequent contact with my family, always with reasonable excuses, how he always knew exactly what to say to make me feel guilty when I questioned something, how I had gradually become dependent on his approval to feel good about myself. I shared my story for the first time in that group. It was liberating and terrifying at the same time. When I finished, I was shaking, tears running down my face. But looking around, I saw only understanding, solidarity, collective strength. You survived, said Julia, taking my hand. You looked evil in the eye and survived. That makes you a warrior. I didn't feel like a warrior. But I was starting to understand that survival itself was an act of courage. I went back to work gradually. Graphic design was something I could do from home, at my own pace. My clients were understanding with the more flexible deadlines I needed. Creativity was hard at first. How to create something beautiful when your inner world was so ugly. But slowly, it returned. Each completed project was a small victory, proof that I was still capable, still functional, still had value beyond being Mark's victim. Mrs. Eleanor became part of my daily routine. We drank coffee together every morning. She told stories of old cases she investigated, always with lessons included, about resilience, about not letting evil win, about the importance of trusting instincts. Your instinct was trying to warn you, she told me one morning. You felt something was wrong, even without being able to name what. The problem is, we are taught to ignore those instincts, especially women. We are taught to be polite, to give the benefit of the doubt, not to make a scene. But sometimes, making a scene saves your life. I thought about the nights I had spent awake, feeling that strange sensation in my chest when I looked at Mark. The times I mentally questioned something he said, but let it slide. The moments when my whole body screamed, something is wrong, but my head rationalized, found explanations. How do we know when to trust instincts and when we're just being paranoid? I asked. Mrs. Eleanor thought for a moment. I think the question isn't knowing for sure. It's giving yourself permission to investigate, to ask uncomfortable questions, to put your safety above politeness. It's better to be called paranoid and be alive than to be considered trusting and end up dead. It was a harsh truth, but necessary. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter. It was from Mark, from prison. My first instinct was to tear it up without reading. But curiosity won. The letter was short, written in neat handwriting. Emily, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I don't expect forgiveness or understanding, but I wanted you to know that, of all of them, you were the hardest. Not because of the execution. That would have been simple, but because for a few moments, however brief, I actually questioned if I could really have something real, if I could stop. But the truth is, I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. I don't know how to feel what normal people feel. And maybe in the end, you were the lucky one. You escaped. The others didn't have that chance. I don't know if this offers any comfort, probably not. But I thought you should know. You were the only one who came close to making me want to change. Just wasn't close enough. M. I read the letter 3 times, feeling a strange mix of anger, disgust, and deep sadness. Even now, even behind bars, he was trying to manipulate, trying to plant the idea that I had been special, that our connection had meant something. But it didn't. Not to him, anyway. To him, I was a means to an end. And that letter was just another attempt to exercise control, to occupy space in my head. I tore the letter into tiny pieces and threw it in the trash. I blocked any possibility of future correspondence. He wouldn't deserve another second of my time, any fragment of my attention. But the letter made me think of Sarah and Jessica, the other victims. They hadn't had the luck I had. They didn't have a Mrs. Eleanor watching, protecting, intervening at the right moment. I contacted their families through the lawyers. It was hard, painful. How do you introduce yourself to people who lost loved ones at the hands of the man you called husband? But they were kind, welcoming even. We shared stories, compared notes, cried together. And somehow, that helped. It created a sense of community around the trauma, a shared purpose of ensuring Mark never had the chance to hurt anyone again. Together, we worked with an organization that helped victims of violent crimes. We offered testimonies, participated in awareness campaigns, spoke in schools and universities about signs of abusive relationships, about the importance of trusting instincts, about how predators actually operate. It was emotionally draining. Every time I told my story in public, I relived the trauma. But it was also cathartic. It transformed my pain into something useful, into something that could save other lives. And slowly, very slowly, I began to feel less broken. The scars were still there, and probably always would be. But they started to hurt less. They started to look less like open wounds and more like battle marks, evidence that I had faced something terrible and survived. 1 year after the trial, I decided to do something I had been avoiding for months. I went back to the neighborhood where I lived with Mark. Not to the house that had already been demolished by a developer, but to the neighborhood, the streets I used to walk, the places that were part of my life before everything fell apart. Mrs. Eleanor went with me. "Are you sure you're ready?" she asked in the car. "No," I admitted. "But I think I'll never be fully ready, and I need to do it. I need to prove to myself that I can." We arrived in the late afternoon when the sun began to dip on the horizon, dyeing everything in orange tones. The neighborhood was busier than I remembered. New houses had been built, new families moved in, life had continued, indifferent to the drama that had unfolded there. We walked slowly down the street. When we reached the lot where my old house stood, I stopped and looked at the empty space. Boards surrounded the site. Construction machines were parked, signaling that soon something new would be erected there. It was strange to think that place, which once represented my home, my dreams of the future, was now just an empty lot waiting to be transformed into something else, as if everything that happened there had been erased, replaced. But I knew it hadn't been erased. Not for me. The memories were all there, vivid and painful. "Can you still see beauty here?" Mrs. Eleanor asked gently. I thought for a moment. I don't know. But maybe I don't need to see beauty. Maybe I just need to accept that this was part of my story, without letting it define who I am. She smiled, approvingly. "That is emotional maturity, Emily. You are growing through the pain, not despite it." We continued walking, passing other houses, neighbors who waved without recognizing me. It was liberating to be invisible there, just another person passing through. When we got back to the car, I felt lighter, not healed, but more whole. As if I had closed a cycle, even if the edges were still a bit frayed. On the way back, Mrs. Eleanor told me more about her past, about the cases she investigated, the criminals she helped catch, but also about the cases she couldn't solve, the victims she couldn't save in time. "I carry some of them with me to this day," she admitted, looking out the window. "There is one especially, Anna. She was your age, married to a charming, successful man. Neighbors called me because they suspected strange things. I started investigating, but I was too slow. When I finally gathered enough evidence, she was already dead. He claimed suicide. With my investigation, we managed to prove it was homicide. He was arrested. But Anna stayed dead." She paused, her voice becoming lower. "That was almost 15 years ago, and since then, I promised myself that if I had another chance, if I saw another similar case, I wouldn't be slow. I wouldn't wait for the perfect evidence. I would act." "That was why you pretended to be crazy," I said, understanding. "To have access, to protect me without raising suspicion." "Exactly. I wasn't going to let another Anna happen. Not if I could help it." I felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost choked me. "You saved my life, Eleanor. Literally. And you gave meaning to the last years of my retirement," she replied with a sad smile. "Sometimes I think we saved each other, in different ways." That night, alone in my apartment, I thought a lot about purpose, about how trauma can break you, but it can also mold you into something stronger, more aware, more empathetic. I decided to do something concrete with my experience. With the help of Mrs. Eleanor and the families of Sarah and Jessica, we created a foundation. The goal was to offer support to victims of abusive relationships, educate on warning signs, and fund investigations of suspicious cases that authorities weren't prioritizing. We called it the Phoenix Foundation. The name was on purpose. The idea that even after the most absolute destruction, it is possible to be reborn. It wasn't easy. Bureaucracy, fundraising, structuring. But every obstacle overcome seemed like a small revenge against Mark. Every life we touched, every woman we helped escape dangerous situations was a way to transform my pain into something positive. We started small, a modest office, 2 employees besides me and Mrs. Eleanor. But the demand was terrifying. We received dozens of messages a day from women asking for help, guidance, simply someone to believe in them when they said something was wrong in their relationships. We implemented a 24-hour hotline, partnerships with shelters. We hired private investigators for cases where there were suspicions but lack of proof. And we created an educational program for schools, teaching young people about healthy relationships, consent, and how to identify abusive behaviors early on. The response was overwhelming. In 6 months, we had already helped over 50 women escape dangerous situations. Some were extreme cases, like mine, Others were situations of psychological abuse, financial control, social isolation. Each story broke my heart a little, but also filled it with determination. None of those women deserved what they were going through. And if I could use my experience, my survival to make a difference in their lives, then maybe all the suffering would have some purpose. 2 years after Mark's trial, I received an unexpected call. It was the prosecutor who had worked on the case. She had news. During the ongoing investigation, the police had identified 3 more potential victims of Mark in other states, women who had disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances in periods that coincided with his presence in those regions. One of them, Patricia, had been reported as a runaway by her then-husband, one of Mark's aliases. He claimed she had abandoned the marriage and disappeared with another man. The case was never thoroughly investigated. With the new evidence, they found Patricia's body, buried on a rural property that belonged to one of Mark's fake identities. She had been strangled. The other 2 victims were still missing, but the police were digging, literally and figuratively, on properties associated with Mark. "We believe there may be more," the prosecutor told me over the phone. "He may have been doing this longer than we imagined, maybe since his 20s. I felt nauseous. How many, do you think? Hard to say. But between confirmed, suspected, and possible cases, maybe a dozen. A dozen women. 12 lives destroyed. 12 families destroyed. And I had almost been the 13th. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, right?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Without a doubt. With these new charges, he will answer for multiple homicides. There is no possibility of him ever seeing freedom again." After hanging up, I sat on the floor of the foundation office and cried. I cried for Patricia. I cried for Sarah and Jessica. I cried for the women whose names we didn't even know yet. I cried for the overwhelming feeling of helplessness in the face of so much evil. Mrs. Eleanor found me like that, sitting on the floor, eyes red. "More victims," was all I could say. She didn't need more explanation. She sat next to me on the floor, not trying to comfort me with empty words, just staying there, present, solid. "What do we do with this?" I asked after a while. "With the knowledge that there are so many monsters out there, preying on innocent women?" "We do exactly what we are doing," Mrs. Eleanor replied. "We fight, we educate, we protect who we can protect. We don't win every battle, Emily, but we win some. And every life saved, every woman who escapes, every predator who falls, is a victory." She was right. I couldn't save everyone. I couldn't undo what Mark had done. But I could honor those who didn't survive by using my own survival to make a difference. That night, we updated the Foundation's website with photos of Mark's known victims. We created a digital memorial, a space for their families to share memories, so they would be remembered not just as victims, but as whole people who had lived, loved, dreamed. It was painful, but necessary. They deserved to be seen. They deserved to have their stories told. 3 years after my near death, the Foundation had grown significantly. We now had 5 offices in different states, a team of 20 people, and partnerships with police agencies specializing in crimes against women. I had become a spokesperson for the cause, giving interviews, speaking at conferences, participating in panels on domestic and psychological violence. It was exhausting, but also rewarding. One of the most impactful talks I gave was at a university. After the presentation, a young woman of about 20 approached. She was crying. "You just described my relationship," she said, voice shaking. "Everything you said about manipulation, about gradual isolation, about feeling like you're going crazy, is exactly what I'm living." I sat with her for 2 hours, listening, guiding, helping her create a safe exit plan. I connected her with Foundation resources. 3 weeks later, I received a message from her. She had ended the relationship, was living with her family again, was in therapy. "You saved my life," she wrote. "I was so confused, believing the problem was me. Now I see he was doing everything deliberately." Messages like that made all the suffering worthwhile. Every life touched, every mind opened, every woman saved, was a blow against the impunity of predators like Mark. But the work also exposed me to horrible stories. Women who hadn't escaped in time, children who lost their mothers, shattered families. Each case left a mark. added more weight to what I already carried. I went back to having nightmares frequently, always variations on the same theme. Mark finding me, cornering me, finishing what he had started. I would wake up sweating, heart racing. It took me minutes to convince myself I was safe, that he was behind bars, that he couldn't reach me. Dr. Roberts helped me understand that this was normal. You are constantly reliving your trauma through the Foundation's work. It is noble, important, but can also be re-traumatizing. You need to find balance. I started implementing stricter boundaries, 1 day a week without any work related to the Foundation. Time for hobbies, for friends, for things that had nothing to do with trauma or survival. I went back to painting, something I loved as a teenager but had abandoned. I bought canvases, paints, brushes, and I started creating. At first, the paintings were dark, violent, full of chaos. But slowly, lighter colors began to appear, softer shapes, hope infiltrating the darkness. I also started dating someone again. This was terrifying. How to trust someone after everything I went through. How to open my heart knowing I was fooled so completely before. The first dates were disasters. I analyzed every word, every gesture, looking for signs of manipulation. I questioned everything, distrusted any show of affection. It was exhausting for me and unfair to the other people, until I met Ben. We met in a bookstore, literally bumping into each other while looking for books in the same section. He was a history teacher, sweet, patient, with a subtle sense of humor that made me genuinely laugh. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. He didn't try to impress with elaborate stories or excessive charm. He was just real, talked about his own struggles, about losing his mother to cancer, about how that made him value genuine connections. I told my story the 3rd time we met. I couldn't keep dating him without him knowing. I thought it would scare him, that he would run as soon as he knew the level of baggage I carried. But he just listened. When I finished, he took my hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me with this, and I am so sorry for what you went through. But I want you to know, I don't see you as broken or damaged. I see someone incredibly strong who survived something horrible and chose to transform that into something positive." I cried in front of him for the first time, not from sadness, but from relief, from being seen, really seen, and not rejected. Our relationship progressed slowly. Ben respected my boundaries, never pressured, always communicated openly. When I had panic attacks or nightmares, he was there, but without suffocating, without trying to fix, just present and supportive. "I don't know if I can be the partner you deserve," I admitted one night, months after we were together. "I still have so many unresolved things." "Everyone has things," he replied. "And I'm not looking for perfection, Emily. I'm looking for real connection, and that's what we have." It was liberating to be with someone who didn't demand I pretend to be completely healed, who accepted that healing is a process, not a destination. 4 years after escaping Mark, unexpected news arrived. He was sick, advanced cancer. Doctors gave him a few months to live. I don't know what I felt when I heard. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, nor compassion. It was something more complex, more confusing. He asked to see me. Through his lawyer, he sent a formal request, said he wanted to make things right before dying. My first reaction was to refuse flatly. Why give him the privilege of my presence? Why risk putting myself in a vulnerable position again? But something pulled me. Maybe the need for closure. Maybe curiosity about what he could possibly have to say. Maybe just the desire to look him in the eye one last time. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. I consulted Dr. Roberts. "There is no right answer here," she told me. "But if you decide to go, go prepared. Go with someone. And remember, you owe him nothing. Not forgiveness, not understanding, not peace of mind." I decided to go. Mrs. Eleanor insisted on accompanying me. Ben wanted to come too, but I thought it would be too much. Some confrontations we need to face only with the people who were there from the beginning. The prison was cold, sterile, with that characteristic smell of disinfectant and despair. We went through several levels of security before finally being taken to the special visitation room. Mark looked different, much thinner, hair completely gray, skin with a yellowish tone. The cancer was visibly consuming him. But the eyes, The eyes still had that calculating glint I remembered so well. He was sitting in a wheelchair, handcuffs on his wrists, despite clearly being too weak to pose any physical threat. I sat at the table across from him. Missus. Eleanor stood behind me, a silent, protective presence. Emily, he said, and his voice was raspy, weak. Thank you for coming. I didn't answer, just watched, waiting. He coughed, a deep, painful cough. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I wanted to apologize to you before I die. Apologize, I repeated, without emotion. For trying to kill me? For killing other women? For destroying entire families? For everything, he said, looking away. I know it means nothing now, but I need to say it. I was wrong. Everything I did was wrong. Silence settled between us. I studied his face, looking for sincerity, for genuine regret, and what I saw was nothing. His words were empty, mechanical. Even now, at death's door, he was acting. You don't feel real remorse, do you? I asked calmly. You're sorry you got caught. Sorry you're dying in prison instead of free and rich. But not for the women you killed. His eyes returned to me, and for a brief moment, the mask slipped. I saw coldness there, the same coldness from that night in the yard. I feel what I can feel, he said finally. I'm not like you, Emily. Never was. I don't know what remorse feels like the way normal people do. Then why call me here? What do you really want? He sighed. Maybe I just wanted to see you one last time. See the one that got away. You were the only one who won, you know. All the others. I won, but you defeated me. And there it was. Even dying, it was still about winning or losing, about control, about power. I stood up from the chair. I hope your last months are long and painful, Mark. And I hope you spend every second thinking about all the lives you destroyed. I started to turn to leave. Emily, he called, voice a little louder. I stopped, but didn't turn around. You'll never be completely free of me. I'll be in your head forever. Every relationship, every moment of doubt, every nightmare. I won more than you think. I turned and looked at him one last time. You're wrong. You didn't define me. You were a horrible chapter in my life, but you are not the whole story. I choose who I am, and I choose not to let you have power over me. And I walked out, Mrs. Eleanor by my side, her hand firm on my shoulder. Outside the prison, I breathed in the fresh air deeply. I felt like I had just climbed a huge mountain. How are you? Asked Mrs. Eleanor. Good, I replied, and I realized it was true. Better than I expected. He tried one last manipulation, one last attempt to make me feel he still had power over me. But he doesn't. Mark died 3 weeks later. I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't send flowers or condolences. I just kept living, kept working, kept healing. His death closed a chapter, but it didn't open new wounds. I had already processed the trauma. I had already made peace with my survival. He was just a footnote now, not the title of my story. 5 years after that terrifying night in the yard, my life was unrecognizable. In the best possible sense. The Phoenix Foundation had expanded to 10 states. We had helped over 1,000 women escape dangerous relationships, implemented educational programs in over 100 schools, and worked with lawmakers to create stronger laws against stalking, harassment, and psychological violence. Ben and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded only by people who truly mattered. It was so different from my wedding to Mark. That had been a show, an elaborate performance. This was genuine, full of real love, real vulnerability. Mrs. Eleanor was my maid of honor. Now 80 years old, still as sharp as ever, still actively working at the foundation. I'm going to work until the day I die, she said. As long as I have breath, I'll fight for these women. We had a son, Leo. When I found out I was pregnant, I was flooded with fears I didn't even know I had. What if I carried some damage so deep I couldn't be a good mother? What if I projected my fears onto him? What if trauma prevented me from loving him as he deserved? But when he was born and I held him for the first time, all those fears dissolved. Looking at that perfect little being, so vulnerable, so trusting, filled me with a renewed purpose. I was going to raise a son who understood consent, who respected boundaries, who recognized signs of abuse. I was going to raise a good man in a world that desperately needed more good men. On a summer afternoon, sitting on the balcony of our apartment with Leo sleeping in my lap, I looked at everything we built. Me, Mrs. Eleanor, Ben, the whole team at the foundation. My cell phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the women we had helped recently, a photo of her and her children in a park, smiling, free. "You guys saved me," the message said. "Thank you for helping me see I deserved more." Tears filled my eyes, but they were good tears. Mark had tried to destroy me. He had dug a literal grave for me, planned my death with the same coldness he planned breakfast. But he had failed, and in the process, inadvertently given me a greater purpose than I would ever have found otherwise. I looked at Leo, then at Ben, who was reading on the living room sofa, then at the photo of the foundation on the wall, Mrs. Eleanor and I cutting the ribbon at the opening of our biggest office. I had survived, I had healed, I had thrived. Mark was right about one thing. I would never forget him completely. The scars were still there. They probably always would be. But they didn't define me. They were just part of my story, not the whole story. I was Emily, survivor, founder, wife, mother, advocate, warrior. And I was alive gloriously, defiantly, gratefully alive. And that, in the end, was the greatest revenge of all. Living well, loving well, making a difference. Mark had dug a grave, but he was the one who fell into it. I was here, under the sun, breathing fresh air, holding my son, planning the future. I had won. And I would keep winning, one day at a time, one saved woman at a time, until there were no more Marks in the world, until there were no more women needing to be saved. It was an ambitious goal, maybe impossible, but after everything I survived, I had learned that impossible is just a word. Now, if you liked this story, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments which part left you shocked. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos I don't post here. I'll see you there.